So one of the more confusing things about getting into this sport are flight numbers. So when you go into the store to pick out your first discs maybe, or maybe just a new disc, you see all these numbers like 7502, and you don't even know what they mean or what to do with those numbers. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what these numbers mean and what you should do with those numbers. So let's get into it. So the first thing you need to know about flight numbers is that they're more like guidelines than anything. They're not really rules of thumb, so you shouldn't take them as full truth. So every number that we talk about, you want to take with a little bit of a grain of salt. But this first number you see, so we're just going to use this T-bird for example. So you got 7502. The first number 7, that's going to be speed. Now, the biggest misconception about speed is that you think when you see speed, you want the highest numbers you can find, because that's going to be the fastest disc. I mean, yes, it's going to be the fastest disc, but you don't want to be getting the highest speed. So a lot of people see these distance drivers and they see like, oh, that's an 11 speed. They're going to see a 12 or 13 speed and think that's going to be the best disc and go the farthest. They do go the farthest, but that's if you can throw them at that proper speed. So you're not going to get the effects of a 13 speed driver unless you can throw it at 13 speed. And to put it for reference, that is about, unless you can throw about like 450 feet, then you're not going to get the most use out of a 13 speed driver. And if you're watching this video for information because you don't know about disc flight numbers, then you might not be able to throw 450 feet. Sorry. So the second number here is 5. As you can see, 5. That is your glide. Now, glide, you don't really have to spend a whole lot of time on it because that's usually correlates a lot with the stability, which is the last 2 numbers. But glide is essentially how much the disc likes to stay in the air, stay afloat. And so the higher the number, the more the disc wants to stay in the air. So if you're new, you kind of want to get a higher glide so that the disc will stay in the air longer and fly a little straighter for you. But again, out of all the numbers, that's probably the least important number to look at. If you disagree with me, say so in the comments. Tell me why it's more important than the others. The third number is your turn. For these next 2, I'm going to be talking mainly about backhand, right hand, backhand. So when you're throwing in a backhand with your right hand, a turn is how much the disc wants to turn to the right in this flight. The misconception about this is that in order to get that turn, you need to be throwing it at the proper speed. So it usually means it'll get 0 turn when you throw it at a 7 speed. So if you throw it faster, you might get a little bit more turn. That is one thing to keep in note. So for example, like this disc right here, it's a mid-range. This has a decent amount of turn on it for me. But if I stand there and throw it, if I throw them 2 throws like with a hyzer angle like this angle right here, if I throw it with a standstill and I throw it about 200 feet, this will probably go straight and then give me a little bit of fade at the end, which is the last number we'll talk about in a little bit, but it won't turn for me. But if I really get behind this and I throw it at that same angle, the same hyzer angle, and I put a lot of power behind it, it's gonna turn a lot. Because the faster you throw a disc, the more it wants to turn. And so you wanna keep that in mind. That's also something to keep in mind, like when if you know a disc turns for you, when you're driving off the tee, but then you're throwing an upshot or something, or a standstill, or you're doing a patent pending out of the woods, and you know you can't get as much power behind it, you might want to change discs because it's not going to turn as much as it would on a drive because you're not getting as much power behind it. So that's the one thing to keep in mind. But it's another thing to keep in mind if you're a beginner and you see that there's turn on the disc, but might be a high speed disc. So like you might get a 13 speed with a -2 turn, meaning it's going to turn a lot for you. It's not going to turn a lot unless you throw it at that 13 speed. So that's one thing to keep in mind about turn. Then the last number on the disc. The last number is called fade, and it's also called low speed stability. So the turn is called high speed stability sometimes, because at the higher speeds, how stable is it? Is it gonna turn over? Is it not gonna turn over? The fade is also called low speed stability. So meaning when the disc slows down, again, throwing backhand, right hand, every disc, and I mean every disc, wants to finish to the left. No matter what the stability is, if it's understable, overstable, which that refers to the high speed turn. It's like if it doesn't want to turn and it wants to fade a lot, that's overstable. But if it does want to turn a lot and it doesn't want to fade a whole lot at the end, that's understable. So low speed stability, every disc at the end wants to turn, go to the left, fade to the left. And the only question is how much. So this T-Bird only has 2. So a lot of people like the T-Bird because you can really crank on it and it's not going to turn for you because it has a 0, but then it's going to give you a little bit of fade at the end. So it has that stability to just have a straight shot and not a whole lot of fade. Unlike the Firebird, or I have the Raptor, which is 9403. This thing likes to fade a lot at the end, so it'll fly nice and straight, but once it gets to start slowing down, it's gonna hook up at the end, which is good for some things. And every disc wants to fade. So if you throw in, well, I don't have one in my bag right now, but if you have a Roadrunner that is really understable, it wants to turn a lot, but even when that slows down, it's gonna, so if it turns over like this, it's gonna flatten out. And when it flattens out, that's the disc trying to get to the left at the end, but it just doesn't have enough fade. But it does fade at the end. So if you throw it really soft, it'll also fly straight and fade. Every disc flies like that if you throw it slow enough. So if you're looking for a new disc, you might want to be looking for a slower number. So probably the most I would recommend is a 7-speed, honestly. If you're just starting out with, if you're throwing these high-speed drivers, like 11, 12, 13 speeds, they're gonna teach you bad form, to be honest, because the only way you're gonna get distance with them is to throw them with bad form. So if you wanna play it right, learn right, you wanna get slower discs, like 4 or 5 speeds, and those will be your best discs starting out. Maybe get a fairway driver, 7-speed, but you also wanna get a little bit of turn on them. You wanna get discs that with maybe a -1 turn or a -2 turn sometimes, just so you can learn how it flies. And then you can graduate to more stable discs once you learn how to get a little bit more power behind your discs, throwing them farther, get more confident throwing. But yeah, so that's the basics on flight numbers. If you agree with me, like this video, but if you don't, let me know in the comments. How would you explain flight numbers to beginners? A lot of beginners will probably be watching this video, so comment down below and help them out. Yeah, subscribe if you like this kind of content, and see you in the next one.